Finally, we are back. Welcome back to the Halfway to Game Day podcast. I am your host, Will Schatz. I am very sorry about the last 2 weeks with no podcast. 2 weeks ago, I was traveling. I went to the Oklahoma State at BYU game in Provo, so I was not at home with my setup to make a podcast. I did tweet a lot, however, so this is probably a good plug because I normally forget to do this. If you want to keep up with me, even when, maybe a pod or two is missed, follow me on X at GameDayWS. Again, that's on X at GameDayWS. I give out my Twitter, my X, like best bet, which is exclusive just to X. Before the games, I normally hit on those, so that's maybe one reason to follow, because those are normally pretty good bets, and it's an upset pick. And also just give general college football takes, and just kind of post quite a bit on there. So if you're interested, you could follow the X. Also, I don't normally say this, and we'll get into the podcast here in a minute, but since we haven't talked in a while, I'm kind of free-balling. If you like the podcast, please follow it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or subscribe on YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel where I post these visually. So if you want to see all the graphics and stuff, you can watch it visually. But please, follow, like, and subscribe, and leave a review if you liked it. If you didn't like it, let me know what I can do better. Always trying to improve the format and just make the podcast better and more enjoyable to listen to or watch. So, like I said, I was in Provo 2 weeks ago, and then on the flight home, I caught some kind of upper respiratory thing. So all of last week, I didn't even go to my actual work because I was so sick. And so my voice on Wednesday, there was no shot I was going to be able to get up and film a podcast. And then I had to catch up on homework that I had missed from the week that I was in Provo, and it was kind of a whole disaster. But now we're back. This is going to be a little bit different of an episode just because we haven't talked in 2 weeks and so much has happened in college football. I'm going to hit kind of my updated conference championship, the way I see the conference championships ending up. There's only a month left in the season that I think just to get these out there now would be good. I was going to do a mid-season recap last week. Well, obviously didn't film, so this is kind of like a mid-season recap, kind of a reset podcast, just to get us back on track for the final couple weeks of the season. Next week, definitely expect to see more of a traditional episode. That'll be after Election Day, so the world will be completely different. But we'll manage, and we'll be here, and hopefully we can kind of, with finals week it's going to be tough. I am in college, so when finals week comes, that might be a tough week to film a pod. But hopefully we can just power through and get one done, even if it's a shorter form, especially with that being near the end of the season. I think we might be able to fit one in, but we'll see. And I plugging it again, I'll keep everybody informed of the podcast schedule and all of that on X at GameDayWS. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about my trip to Provo. It is really the first experience that I've had at a visiting stadium. And it was a heck of a one to start with, because the stadium is absolutely gorgeous. It's settled in like a mountain valley. If you haven't seen it, at least look up pictures, because it's breathtaking. We got there early enough to take some pictures and see the mountains. It was a night game, so eventually the mountains went away because it just got dark, but we got there early enough with the daylight to see the mountains. Absolutely breathtaking stadium. Everybody there was super duper nice. They all thanked us for visiting Provo. The rumors were absolutely true about how nice they were. We got the free ice cream going in our section, and it was really a good time. Stadium and production of it was a little bit too gimmicky for me. They had a lot of the light show and the fire and the drones and all this crazy stuff going on. It was a little bit too gimmicky for me. It felt a little bit high schoolish, and that's not to say that it was poorly produced or anything like that. It seemed like a lot of gimmicks to get people excited when I don't feel like you really need that in college football. But it's not my cup of tea. Whatever. It could, the fans there seem to like it, so they, if they liked it, that's good. That's good. It's just not for me. Their student section, the BYU student section, I believe they call it the Rock. Unbelievable. They were involved the whole game. They were loud. They were there early. They were making noise during warm-ups to like distract the Oklahoma State player. It was really a great environment. And then it also helped that the game was. I mean, Oklahoma State ended up losing. Obviously, I'm an Oklahoma State fan. I go to school at Oklahoma State, but the Oklahoma State ended up losing. But it was good that it was a good game, that we didn't, me and my family didn't travel all the way out there to just watch us get our teeth kicked in. So that's good. Oklahoma State, and I mean I'll get into this just to address it. They suck. They're one of the, I would probably say behind. I think they're better than Purdue. But let me look through the standings, actually, because I have a hard time thinking of a team off the top of my head that is in the Power 5 that is worse than Oklahoma State. Purdue, maybe Mississippi State, but those may be the only two teams that could be in competition. Oklahoma State's really bad. It's really disappointing, and I'm completely numb to it now, so that's good. But yeah, that was my trip to Provo. Interesting state, like the whole Mormon thing is very interesting. But yeah, they have a heck of a football team, and it was a fun environment. So, like I said, we're just going to talk about some conference championship races, see how I see them turning out, and we'll do the power conferences. And then I'm going to do the American Conference Championship because it's really the only other one that actually interests me, just because of the scenarios. The other ones are kind of boring to me. I don't think they've been as interesting as I would have thought at the beginning of the year. I don't know how long this podcast is going to be. It could be 20 minutes. It could be 40. I'm not sure, but we'll see. So let's jump right in here to the American Conference Championship. If you see it visually on YouTube, you're just gonna have a spoiler because I'm not gonna phase it in or anything. Right now, today on October 30th, 2024, the way I see the American Conference Championship is Clemson versus Miami. This one's pretty obvious. These have been the two best teams of the conference, I think. We see Pittsburgh surging. SMU, I just don't think has the guys to make it to Charlotte. Clemson and Miami, to me, are easily the two best teams. Clemson's a surprising one because after week 1 against Georgia, you would have thought that they were dead in the water, and they have done nothing but play good football since. Miami has played around a little bit too much. They're 8-0, but my goodness, do they make it look hard every single week. Cam Ward is either brilliant or he's not. There's no in between. This is an interesting matchup because I think Clemson is the definition of we know what we're doing, and we're just not going to shoot ourselves in the foot, where Miami is the definition of if we play our best, we're going to beat you by 50. If we play our worst, we're going to lose by 50. So, this would be a very interesting game, a very interesting stylistic matchup. I think Miami would have the edge, but obviously Clemson would be a contender. And who would have thought that after week 1, Clemson would even have... I mean, if you looked at that result in a vacuum and you told somebody at the beginning of the year, or if you told somebody, if they didn't watch the rest of how this season has gone and you said, where do you think Clemson is after that Georgia loss, I think you might say, 3-4, 4-3, something like that, just based off kind of how it looked like they were going to play from that result. Turns out Georgia's just really good. So, ACC Championship, Clemson versus Miami. The next conference we're going to cover is the Big 12. Right now, the way I see this, there's two undefeated teams in this conference, BYU and Iowa State. Iowa State concerns me because they still have to play Utah on the road, which, Utah's not very good. But I have a feeling that at some point Utah's going to sneak up on a team. It could be this week against BYU, and we'll talk about BYU. But Iowa State concerns me because they still have to play Utah. If they beat Utah, and they still have to play Kansas State too. If they lose to Kansas State, they are in third place. Kansas State has the tiebreaker over them. So, I think right now, if we're being honest, it's a 3-team race. I don't think Colorado will get there unscathed, but it's certainly possible. It could be a 4-team race. I really only see it as a 3-team race, though. I think BYU is almost a lock. I think if you just look at the rest of their schedule, nothing really concerns me. I think you have Utah this week. Rivalry game, who knows, weird stuff happens. I'm looking over at it on my other screen, so if you see me looking over, that's why. They play Kansas in Provo. Not worried about that game. Arizona State on the road could be tough. But I don't know. That one, I have a hard time. And then Houston on November 30th in Provo. Yeah, I'm not really worried about that for them. I think BYU's basically a lock. I think it's either going to be Iowa State or Kansas State. I've gone with Kansas State just because of the overall talent. I think they're just a better version of Iowa State and a little bit more consistent version of Iowa State. But obviously with a true freshman quarterback, which is what Kansas State has in Avery Johnson, it's kind of tough to tell because he could at any point just kind of play like a freshman. Or I guess he's not a true freshman. I guess he's a redshirt. But regardless, he could just kind of play like a freshman and make those mistakes. Rocco Becht, a little bit more experience, has last year under his belt. I think this is a very fascinating race. I think it's turned out in a way that maybe not a lot of people would have thought. I think that this one is going to be interesting all the way to the end. And I really think we're in a position right now where if BYU and Iowa State both win out, the Big 12 is pretty much guaranteed to get 2 teams in the playoff. I know a lot of people in the national media would think, well, but should they? Who do they play? If you win every game in your conference and the only game you lose is in your conference championship game, and you don't, and if you are 12-1 and don't get in the playoff as a Power 4 conference, you are insane. Like the playoff system is already broken. We should just go back to 2 teams in the BCS because that's absolutely nuts. The next conference is the Big Ten. The Big Ten. This one, honestly, the Big Ten is extremely, extremely interesting as well. Obviously, 3 of the top 4 teams in the AP poll are in the Big Ten. Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. My favorite team of this year has been Indiana, who is 8-0, 5-0 in conference play. They won last game without their starting quarterback and really didn't sweat all that much to get to that win. I think Oregon is... I have a hard time seeing them as the number 1 team in the country, but I do think, obviously, they're like a top 5 team. A number 1 team is just... They have everything, and I don't know why I can't see it, but just like when I see Oregon number 1, it just... I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm not used to it, but certainly I like Oregon. I have nothing against Oregon. But currently I have the Big Ten Championship, Ohio State versus Oregon. Indiana still has to play Ohio State, and I have a hard... They still have to play Michigan State in East Lansing, Ohio State on the road late in the year, and then the Spoilermakers at home. That's probably a win, but I have a hard time seeing them get out of that schedule unscathed. I hope they do. I really, really hope they do. I like Indiana a lot. I like how they're made up. But it's just hard for me to see them get there. Ohio State versus Oregon is my Big Ten championship prediction. This could easily change this weekend if Penn State beats Ohio State. This is going to get some clarity this weekend. If Penn State at home beats Ohio State, I would change this to Penn State, certainly. I think this is probably a 3-bid league regardless. I don't remember. Let's see who Oregon has left to play. Oregon's going to get through unscathed, I think, unless they stumble at Michigan this weekend, which I don't see happening. I think they're going to get through 12-0 and have no issue making it to the Big Ten Championship. It just depends on who they play. I don't think Indiana will get there. I think almost if you're an Indiana fan, you want Ohio State to win this weekend, because I think if you face a 2-loss conference foe in the shoe, I have a hard time thinking that Ryan Day is going to let them get to 3 conference losses. So I think if you're Indiana, you almost want Ohio State to win so they maybe overlook you a little bit. I don't know. I just think that right now, as of today, Ohio State versus Oregon is the Big Ten championship game. For the SEC, there's another team that I like a lot that has been a little bit of a shocker. For the SEC championship, I have Texas A&M versus Georgia. Georgia, for obvious reasons, they went into Austin and beat down on Texas. And truth be told, I think that maybe the second half comeback against Alabama to almost win the game in Tallahassee should be talked about more. I think that Georgia has figured out, like, how do I want to say this? I think they've figured out what they want to be, if that makes sense. Where when they were playing Alabama in that first half, I think they just, like, maybe the pressure got to them a little bit, and in the second half they were able to just go out and play. And I saw that in the Texas game too, where they were just able to go out and play and forget about all the outside noise and just go out there and play. Ole Miss has been disappointing. I had them as a preseason conference pick. They've been disappointing. They're not going to make it. I don't think LSU makes it based off the Texas A&M loss and what I saw from them in that. My throat is hurting. But Texas A&M versus Georgia in the SEC championship game is, as of right now, how I see it turning out. For the other conferences, the only one I'm picking is the ACC championship, because I thought it was the most interesting kind of possible outcome. This is not necessarily what I think is going to happen, but it's what I hope will happen. Army versus Navy in the ACC championship. AAC championship. Army versus Navy in the last week of the year as a non-conference game. So both of these teams, one of them is going to lose in that. Both of these teams could go into the conference championship still undefeated in conference play, and possibly have like a second round playoff matchup if they were to both make it. I don't think they both make it, obviously. I think the only chance the American has for a team to get in is if Army runs the table. Now, the problem with that sentiment is they still have to play Notre Dame. They play Notre Dame at home, but they still have to play Notre Dame. They don't really have a home field advantage in that regard. It's a military base, or I guess a military academy, not a military base. Looking up right now. Okay, never mind on that. But yeah, I think Army versus Navy is just the most interesting matchup of any of the Group of 5 conference championship games, just because that would be absolutely bonkers. Let's take a look at updated halfway to game day rankings in the halfway to game day poll. A lot of this has changed since the last time we talked, obviously, because a lot of these teams have played each other. Oregon's played Ohio State, speaking of which, I did not add them. Hold on. We're going to change this on the fly here. Just real quick. Because I somehow forgot about... And then I'll add Indiana here. I think that's really what I meant to do. If you're watching visually, I just changed the whole poll on you. So this is really what I meant. I forgot about Ohio State for some reason in my original poll. But now we've got, if you're watching or if you're listening, I'll go through the whole poll. Number 1, Oregon. I think Oregon has, to this point, proven that they're the best team in the country. Number 2, Georgia. I think they're sneaking up on their heels. Number 3, Penn State. Like I said, excuse me, if Penn State wins this weekend, they probably rise to number 2. But, I mean, who knows? Georgia's win over Texas was so impressive. Who knows? Number 4, BYU. BYU's better than nothing but win. You can't punish a team for winning. Doesn't matter who they play. Number 5, Ohio State. Ohio State has the loss to Oregon and has looked vulnerable the last couple weeks. In the same vein, when we cover the looking in, Texas has looked more vulnerable than I thought they would early in the year. Right behind Texas is Indiana. Indiana then followed by Miami. Miami's also a team undefeated, has looked vulnerable. Haven't been able to put them in the top 5 in good conscience. I like Miami a lot. I just wish they would just win football games rather than sitting there and playing with their food. Right behind them is Texas A&M. I like Texas A&M a lot. They're on the rise, and right behind A&M looking in is Iowa State. Obviously, this is the most looking in teams we've had all year. I think this really represents the state that college football is in right now, where there's so many teams that really probably should be in the top 5 and aren't, because there's other teams that should probably be slotted in above them. It's a very interesting college football landscape right now. I think the 12-team playoff has helped because it really gives teams like Indiana or an Iowa State or a BYU hope to kind of get in backdoor, even if they don't win their conference championship, because they have the opportunity to get in with a lower seed, or I guess a higher seed. But I guess it depends on how you look at it. I always say a lower seed because it's a lower number in like a ranking sense. Anyway, there was some talk a couple weeks ago about a group of 5 team possibly getting the bid over the Big 12. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I think that there's still quality competition left in the Big 12 that's going to boost a team's resume into that 4th spot. I also think that the only chance that the non-conference teams has is Boise State, and Boise State has looked vulnerable. Ashton Jeanty is unbelievable, but UNLV was able to kind of bottle him up. I think he only had like 3.2 yards at carry, so it's, that's against and don't get me wrong, UNLV is a good team, but that's against that level of competition. I think if you were to put Boise State on a neutral field against like a Georgia, or a team like with a Texas A&M or a Texas, or a team with like a really good elite defensive line, I think he struggles more. I think Oregon obviously has a great defensive line. I don't think it's the best in the country. I think if you put them against the best in the country, they're probably going to struggle. Now, with that being said, we're talking about Boise State, right? I'm not trying to move the goalposts on them and say, well, but they couldn't do it against the best competition. If anything, that's credit to them, that they've been so good, and Ashton Jeanty has been so good that it's tough to even see him get bottled up unless it's the best competition. And he got a little bit bottled up by UNLV. We'll see how that continues to go. But yeah, anyway, that's the updated halfway to game day rankings. The top 5, like I said, Oregon, Georgia, Penn State, BYU, Ohio State. We'll see how this shakes out after this weekend. Penn State and Ohio State obviously play each other. BYU and they could lose at any point. That league is so just wild. They could lose at any point. Obviously we won't go through a best bet like recap, obviously, because I didn't have any best bets last week. But I'll give a couple bets this week. This isn't really like a full-fledged betting week. I just kind of picked a couple lines that interested me. Number 4, Ohio State versus number 3, Penn State. Penn State, they have, at home as a home underdog at 3.5. I think if you're giving me a field goal, even if Ohio State wins by 3, I still win this bet. I couldn't pass up on that number. Give me Penn State plus 3.5. North Carolina versus Florida State. Florida State's year has gotten worse and worse and worse. I had them on like the first 3 weeks of this podcast, and then I stopped covering them. Kind of in the same way I stopped covering Oklahoma State because they just suck. North Carolina, Florida State, under 50.5. I think, North Carolina's defense is pretty bad. I think that Florida State's offense is even worse, and I think Florida State's defense is pretty good and good enough to stop the North Carolina offense. I could see this easily going under 50.5. And then number 18 Pitt travels to number 20 SMU, and they have Pitt as over a touchdown underdog on the road. They have them at 7.5. I think 7.5 is way too high. I could see like 3 to 5 maybe, but I think even if you still gave me a field goal, I think Pitt wins outright. So I think even if you gave me a field goal, I'd still take this. So with it being at 7.5, I'm definitely going to take it. And I think that is it. Like I said, hopefully next week we can get back to, more of a regular format with the podcast. This was just kind of an episode to get an episode out. I still, I'm trying to catch up with school, so got to do all that stuff. But I did want to get something posted just so, I don't go 3 weeks without posting and then have to catch up after another pivotal game in the Big Ten. But yeah, hopefully enjoy all the games. If you're going to the stadium, I will be going to an Oklahoma State game this weekend. Pray for my sanity. If you're going to the games, please drive safely, drive responsibly. Make sure you have a designated driver if need be. We got some homecomings coming up. Like I said, I'll go to Oklahoma State's homecoming this weekend. Homecomings get wild. So just plan responsibly. Not even if you're not drinking, other people are. So just be paying attention. And let's enjoy some college football and everybody get back safe. So that's it from me. Everybody have a great weekend, and we will see you back here next week for sure on another episode of the Halfway to Game Day podcast. See ya.